A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms just wrapped its triumphant first season, and while we're all celebrating, there's a massive question looming. What comes next for Dunk and Egg? Because the challenges ahead for this show are actually pretty terrifying. Let's start with the good news. Season 1 of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has absolutely breathed new life into the Game of Thrones franchise at a time when it desperately needed saving. Think about where we were before this show premiered. The final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones were widely panned. House of the Dragon had a choppy second season, and George R.R. Martin hadn't managed to add new pages to his book series in 8 years. By the time A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms premiered last month, the memory of when Thrones was great television had largely faded, replaced by widespread frustration with bad writing or with no writing at all. But this show changed everything. It wasn't trying to be Game of Thrones again. No Iron Throne, no massive battles, no dragons. Just a handful of great characters and, as showrunner Ira Parker put it, a lot of heart. The first season adapted George R.R. Martin's 1998 novella, The Hedge Knight, and it worked beautifully. But now comes the hard part, following that up. Season 2 is already in production, and it's adapting The Sworn Sword, Martin's second novella in the Dunk and Egg saga. And here's where things get complicated. Without giving too much away, The Sworn Sword features even lower stakes than The Hedge Knight. The general conflict of the novella revolves around a dispute about water rights to a stream. Let me repeat that. Water rights to a stream. There is much less action. Most of the novella is just characters talking. There's no tournament, no trial by combat, just people arguing about water. Viewers enjoyed the small scale of Season 1, but Season 2 may test just how low the stakes can get before it feels like almost nothing is happening. Showrunner Ira Parker told The Hollywood Reporter in January, "I think the scope will be the same, maybe even smaller. That's a bold choice when you're trying to keep audiences engaged." But it gets worse. None of the secondary characters from the first season will be returning. At least they don't in the book. You'll get Dunk and Egg again, portrayed wonderfully by Peter Claffey and Dexter Soul Ansel, but that's it. Say goodbye to Daniel Ing's Lionel Baratheon, Sean Thomas's Raymond Fossaway, and every single Targaryen outside of Egg. They may return in future seasons, but not in Season 2. The characters you've grown attached to will be sidelined. We will get a new cast orbiting Dunk and Egg, but it means starting over with building those emotional connections. Parker has confirmed the plan is another 6-episode story in Season 2, but The Sworn Sword is less suited to be broken down into TV episodes. There aren't really any big twists on the level of Egg revealing himself to be Aegon Targaryen that serve as natural mid-season climaxes. And then there's the budget issue. Parker revealed that because they have to film in warmer locations for Season 2, the book takes place during a drought, they can't shoot exteriors in Belfast. They have to go to a sunny location with no water, which costs money. That's a major expense we did not have in Season 1. So they have less money to work with, effectively, have to tell a story with even lower stakes than Season 1, lose all the beloved secondary characters, and need to make a novella about water rights compelling television for 6 episodes. No pressure. There's also the lore problem. The Sworn Sword has a lot of talk about the Blackfyre Rebellion. The first season made extensive use of flashbacks, and the show could do so again and actually show much of the rebellion. That would solve some problems around the lack of action and could be visually spectacular. But it's difficult to square how they could afford to do that with the budgetary restrictions Parker outlined. And if you show too much of the rebellion, you start to drift too far away from Dunk and Egg. Talk too much about the rebellion at all, and viewers may start wondering why they didn't just make a show about that instead. It's a tough needle to thread. That's Season 2. Then there's Season 3, which has already been greenlit. That season will presumably adapt The Mystery Knight, which comes with a bit more action than The Sworn Sword and should be more straightforward to adapt. But then we're staring into the void, just as Thrones did more than a decade ago when it outpaced Martin's novels. And here's where things get really interesting. In the finale, Arlen tells Dunk, "A true knight always finishes a story." I don't think that line was an accident. It reads a bit like a dig at Martin himself. The goal must be for a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms to complete the stories of Dunk and Egg. Parker has hinted at exactly that. He recently shared that Martin gave him outlines for 10 to 12 stories, in addition to the first 3, and then added that anything beyond Book 3 would highly involve George. Martin long talked about wanting to write roughly a dozen Dunk and Egg novellas that tell the entire stories of their lives. But, stop me if you've heard this one, his actual publishing of them has stalled. The Mystery Knight, the most recent novella, was released in 2010. 2010! That's 16 years ago. This show could be Martin's chance to finally finish telling the stories of these two characters. And, yes, the potential pitfall here is painfully obvious. Game of Thrones nosedived shortly after it outpaced Martin's writing. In retrospect, many of the worst parts of the series were when the showrunners decided to deviate from Martin's work. It's absolutely fair to be nervous about this happening again. But here's the good news. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms already had to extensively deviate from the novella, and they did so brilliantly. Not every change worked. Many found the flashback in Episode 5 to be a huge misstep, but others were extraordinary. The scene in Lionel's tent in Episode 1 was one of the best of the season, and it was wholly original. Other highlights include the addition of the sex worker characters that Dunk interacts with, the Alice with Three Fingers pub song and subsequent conversation between Dunk and Egg going off to train Thunder for the joust. Those scenes show that Parker and company can expand on Martin's work and find success. They'll need to flex that muscle for this series to continue flourishing. Season 1 was excellent, but it was also the easiest story to adapt. The Hedge Knight is the most straightforward, action-packed, and dramatically satisfying of the 3 published novellas. It'll only get more difficult from here. Season 2 will test whether audiences will stick around for a story about water rights. Season 3 will hopefully bring some of that action back. And then seasons 4 through potentially 12, those will be sailing into completely uncharted waters, telling stories that Martin has outlined but never written. The early returns indicate that this show is up to the task. Season 1 proved they can take Martin's novella and not only adapt it faithfully, but enhance it with original material that feels true to the spirit of the story. They found the heart in these characters, made us care about a hedge knight and his squire in ways that felt fresh, even in this oversaturated Game of Thrones universe. Peter Claffey and Dexter Soul Ansel have chemistry that carries the show. The writing has been sharp. The small scale has been refreshing rather than limiting. They've shown they understand what makes these stories special. It's not the dragons or the throne or the massive battles. It's the characters, the relationships, the moments of humanity in a brutal world. But the road ahead is daunting. Smaller stakes, smaller budgets, losing beloved characters, and eventually sailing past Martin's published work entirely. If they can navigate all of that and keep delivering the quality of Season 1, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms could be the thing that truly redeems the Game of Thrones franchise. Season 1 gave us hope. Now let's see if they can finish the story, because as Arlen said, a true knight always does.